In the shadowed corridors of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of secrets whisper through marble halls, one moment would forever alter the course of the British royal family. It was a Tuesday evening in March 1974 when the unthinkable happened. A moment so shocking that even the most seasoned royal protection officers would later struggle to recount it without their voices trembling. Inspector James Beaton had served the Crown for over a decade, his unwavering loyalty and razor-sharp instincts earning him the coveted position as Princess Anne's personal protection officer. He had witnessed state dinners with world leaders, navigated through crowds of thousands, and maintained his composure through countless royal engagements. Nothing, however, could have prepared him for what he would witness on Pall Mall that fateful evening. As Princess Anne's Rolls-Royce made its way through London's evening traffic, returning from a charity event, Inspector Beaton noticed something that made his blood run cold. The princess, known for her steely composure and fearless demeanor, was trembling, not from cold, but from something far more sinister that was about to unfold before their very eyes. What happened next would not only test the limits of royal protocol, but would also reveal the true character of a princess who refused to bow down to terror, and a loyal guard who would sacrifice everything to protect the crown. This is the story of courage, loyalty, and a shocking incident that the palace tried desperately to keep from the public eye. Until now. The evening of March 20th, 1974, began like any other for Inspector James Beaton. At 38 years old, he had dedicated his life to the protection of the British royal family, earning his position through years of exemplary service with the Metropolitan Police. His colleagues often remarked that James possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it materialized, a skill that had kept him and his charges safe through countless public appearances. Princess Anne, then 23 years old, had just concluded a successful charity gala at the Guildhall in support of the Save the Children Fund, an organization close to her heart. The event had raised substantial funds, and the princess was in remarkably good spirits as she prepared for the journey back to Buckingham Palace. Her lady-in-waiting Rowena Brassey accompanied her, along with Inspector Beaton and the princess's chauffeur, Alex Callender. As they settled into the burgundy Rolls-Royce, Princess Anne reviewed the evening's success with quiet satisfaction. The charity had benefited tremendously from her presence, and several prominent donors had committed to significant contributions. She had worn her mother's sapphire tiara for the occasion, and the press photographs would undoubtedly be favorable. Everything about the evening suggested it would be remembered as yet another successful royal engagement. Inspector Beaton took his customary position in the front passenger seat, his trained eyes constantly scanning the surroundings as they departed the Guildhall. The route back to Buckingham Palace was familiar territory, one they had travelled dozens of times before. Traffic moved at its usual pace through the heart of London, with nothing to suggest that this evening would be any different from the hundreds that had preceded it. The conversation in the vehicle was light and pleasant. Princess Anne discussed the evening's highlights with Miss Brassey, particularly praising a young violinist who had performed during the dinner. The princess had always maintained a genuine interest in the arts, and she spoke enthusiastically about potentially inviting the musician to perform at a future palace event. As they turned onto Pall Mall, Inspector Beaton noticed a white Ford Escort that had been following them for several blocks. In his line of work, such observations were routine, and initially he thought nothing of it. London traffic often created the illusion of vehicles following one another, particularly during evening hours when many people were making their way home from work or social engagements. However, something about the Ford Escort's behavior began to trouble him. The vehicle maintained a consistent distance behind them, neither attempting to overtake nor falling further back despite several opportunities to do so. Inspector Beaton's instincts, honed by years of experience, began to signal that something was amiss. He discreetly adjusted his rear-view mirror to keep a better watch on the suspicious vehicle while maintaining his conversation with the chauffeur about the route ahead. His training had taught him never to alarm his charges unnecessarily, but his heightened awareness was now fully engaged. Princess Anne, absorbed in her conversation with Miss Brassey, remained unaware of Inspector Beaton's growing concern. She was discussing plans for an upcoming visit to Scotland, where she would be opening a new hospital wing in Edinburgh. The princess had always taken her royal duties seriously, and she prided herself on being thoroughly prepared for every engagement. The Ford Escort continued its pursuit as they approached the mall, and Inspector Beaton began to formulate potential responses to what he increasingly believed might be a deliberate tale. His hand moved imperceptibly closer to his radio, ready to call for backup if the situation escalated. Years of training had taught him that preparation was the key to successful protection work. As they passed St. James's Palace, the Ford Escort made an unexpected maneuver. accelerating rapidly and pulling alongside their Rolls-Royce. Inspector Beaton immediately tensed, his protective instincts now in full alert mode. Through the passenger window of the Ford, he could see a man with dark hair and intense eyes staring directly at their vehicle. Princess Anne noticed Inspector Beaton's sudden change in demeanor and followed his gaze toward the white Ford Escort. For the first time that evening, a sense of unease crept into her voice as she asked, "James, is everything quite all right?" Inspector Beaton's response was measured and professional, despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "Your Royal Highness, we may have a situation developing. I'm going to ask Alex to take some evasive action, and I need you and Miss Brassey to remain calm and follow my instructions exactly." The Ford Escort began to slow down, forcing their chauffeur to reduce speed as well. Inspector Beaton realized they were being deliberately maneuvered, and his worst fears began to crystallize. This was not a random encounter or mistaken identity situation. Someone had specifically targeted Princess Anne's vehicle, and their intentions were clearly malevolent. Alex Callender, the chauffeur, had served the royal family for over 15 years and had never encountered anything more dangerous than aggressive paparazzi. However, he trusted Inspector Beaton's judgment implicitly and began to follow the protection officer's quiet instructions about alternative routes and evasive driving techniques. Miss Brassey, sensing the gravity of the situation, moved closer to Princess Anne and began to prepare mentally for whatever might unfold. As a lady-in-waiting, she had received basic security briefings, but nothing in her aristocratic background had prepared her for the possibility of a genuine threat to their safety. The Ford Escort suddenly swerved directly in front of their Rolls-Royce, forcing Alex to brake sharply. Inspector Beaton immediately reached for his radio, but before he could call for assistance, the occupants of the Ford Escort began to emerge from their vehicle. The man from the passenger seat was holding what appeared to be a pistol, and he was walking directly toward Princess Anne's door. In that moment, Inspector Beaton realized they were facing an attempted kidnapping. His training kicked in automatically as he assessed the situation and began to implement emergency protocols. The safety of Princess Anne was his primary responsibility, and he was prepared to sacrifice his own life to protect her. Princess Anne, witnessing the armed man approaching their vehicle, felt her hands begin to tremble slightly. However, her royal upbringing and natural courage prevented her from succumbing to panic. She had been raised to face adversity with dignity and strength, and she was determined not to disappoint the crown or her family in this moment of crisis. The armed man reached their vehicle and began demanding that Princess Anne exit the car. His voice was aggressive and threatening, and Inspector Beaton could see that the situation was escalating rapidly beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. The time for evasive action had passed, and now they faced a direct confrontation with what appeared to be professional criminals. Inspector Beaton began to open his door, knowing that he would need to position himself between the gunman and Princess Anne. His own weapon was secured in a shoulder holster, but drawing it would require careful timing and positioning to avoid endangering the royal passenger he was sworn to protect. The next few seconds would determine whether this evening would end in tragedy or triumph, and Inspector Beaton knew that every decision he made in the coming moments would be scrutinized for the rest of his career. The safety of one of Britain's most beloved royals hung in the balance, and the weight of that responsibility focused his mind like nothing ever had before. The gunman approached Princess Anne's side of the Rolls-Royce with deliberate, menacing steps. Inspector Beaton could see the man's face clearly now through the window, noting the cold determination in his eyes and the professional manner in which he handled his weapon. This was not the work of a desperate amateur or mentally unstable individual, but rather someone with training and a carefully planned objective. "Get out of the car now," the armed man demanded, his voice carrying a slight accent that Inspector Beaton couldn't immediately place. The barrel of his pistol was pointed directly at the window where Princess Anne sat, her face pale but composed despite the trembling in her hands that had become more pronounced. Inspector Beaton made a split-second decision that would define the rest of his career. Rather than attempting to draw his own weapon from inside the confined space of the vehicle, where he might accidentally endanger Princess Anne, he chose to exit the car and confront the gunman directly. His years of training had taught him that sometimes the best protection came from becoming the primary target himself. "Stay in the car, Your Royal Highness," he instructed firmly as he opened his door. "No matter what happens, do not leave this vehicle." Princess Anne's response demonstrated the courage that would later make her legendary among the royal family. Despite her fear, she spoke with clear authority. "I shall do no such thing. I will not abandon you to face this alone, James." The second gunman, who had been driving the Ford Escort, now positioned himself near the rear of the Rolls-Royce, effectively blocking any escape route. Inspector Beaton realized they were dealing with a sophisticated operation involving multiple perpetrators who had clearly studied their target and planned their approach meticulously. As Inspector Beaton stepped out of the vehicle, the lead gunman immediately shifted his attention to the protection officer. "You will order the princess to exit the vehicle immediately, or I will shoot you where you stand," the man threatened, his weapon now pointed directly at Inspector Beaton's chest. The inspector's response was calm but uncompromising. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, sir. It is my duty to protect Her Royal Highness, and I will not facilitate any action that might bring her harm." Alex Callender, the chauffeur, found himself in an impossible position. His instinct was to drive away immediately, but with Inspector Beaton now outside the vehicle and armed men positioned around them, any sudden movement might result in tragedy. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he waited for guidance from the protection officer. Miss Brassey, meanwhile, had moved to shield Princess Anne as much as possible within the confines of the car. Her own fear was palpable, but her loyalty to the princess and her sense of duty compelled her to remain calm and supportive during the crisis. The lead gunman grew increasingly agitated when his demands were not immediately met. He had clearly expected the intimidation of his weapon to result in quick compliance, and Inspector Beaton's refusal to cooperate was disrupting whatever timeline the criminals had established for their operation. "You have 10 seconds to comply with my instructions," the gunman announced, his voice rising with frustration. "If the princess does not exit this vehicle, I will begin shooting, starting with you." Inspector Beaton used those 10 seconds to assess his options and prepare for action. He noticed that while the lead gunman's attention was focused on him, the second perpetrator was watching the surrounding area for potential witnesses or police response. This suggested they were concerned about being discovered, which might provide an opportunity for intervention. During this tense standoff, a private citizen who had been walking nearby noticed the commotion and began to approach the scene. The man, later identified as Ronald Russell, was a former boxer who had been returning home from work when he witnessed what appeared to be an armed robbery in progress. The arrival of this unexpected witness seemed to rattle the criminals, who had clearly planned their operation to avoid public attention. The second gunman immediately moved to intercept Russell, shouting warnings for him to stay back and mind his own business. Russell, however, possessed the same type of protective instinct that drove Inspector Beaton's actions. Recognizing that someone was in serious danger, he ignored the warnings and continued to move closer to the scene, his presence adding another unpredictable element to an already volatile situation. Princess Anne, observing the chaos unfolding outside her vehicle, made a decision that would later be cited as an example of royal courage under extreme duress. Despite Inspector Beaton's explicit instructions to remain in the car, she began to lower her window to address the gunman directly. "I believe you have made a serious error in judgment," she said to the lead gunman, her voice carrying the authority that came from a lifetime of royal training. "I am Princess Anne of the British royal family, and this incident will result in the full response of Scotland Yard and the British government." The gunman's reaction to Princess Anne's words was immediate and concerning. Rather than being intimidated by her royal status, he seemed energized by the confirmation of her identity. This suggested that the princess herself was indeed the specific target of the operation, rather than a victim of random opportunity. "Exactly what I was hoping to hear, Your Royal Highness," the gunman replied with a disturbing smile. "You are going to come with us, and your cooperation will determine whether your protection officer and companions survive this encounter." Inspector Beaton realized that negotiation was futile and that decisive action was required. The arrival of Ronald Russell had created a moment of distraction among the criminals, and he knew this might represent their best opportunity to turn the situation around. Drawing his service weapon with practiced efficiency, Inspector Beaton moved to place himself directly between the gunman and Princess Anne's window. His action was swift and professional, but the confined space and presence of innocent civilians made any use of his weapon extremely risky. The lead gunman reacted immediately to Inspector Beaton's defensive move, swinging his pistol toward the protection officer. The sound of the first gunshot shattered the evening quiet of Pall Mall, and Princess Anne's involuntary gasp could be heard even above the traffic noise from surrounding streets. Inspector Beaton felt the bullet graze his shoulder, spinning him partially around, but not incapacitating him. His own training and adrenaline allowed him to maintain his footing and continue to shield Princess Anne from the gunman's line of sight. Ronald Russell, witnessing Inspector Beaton being shot, immediately charged toward the second gunman with the courage that would later earn him national recognition. His intervention created additional chaos in the scene, making it difficult for the criminals to maintain control of the situation. Princess Anne, seeing Inspector Beaton wounded in her defense, made another decision that defied protocol but demonstrated her character. She opened her car door and stepped out to assist her injured protection officer, placing herself in direct danger but refusing to allow him to face the threat alone. "James, are you seriously injured?" she asked, moving to his side despite the ongoing danger. Her presence outside the vehicle completely changed the dynamics of the confrontation and forced Inspector Beaton to adapt his protective strategy on the fly. The criminals now found themselves dealing with multiple variables they had not anticipated. An armed and wounded protection officer, an uncooperative royal target, a civilian intervening in their operation, and the increasing likelihood that police response was imminent. The lead gunman, realizing that their carefully planned operation was dissolving into chaos, made a desperate decision to regain control. He moved toward Princess Anne directly, intending to physically force her into their escape vehicle, regardless of the consequences to her companions. Inspector Beaton, despite his wound, positioned himself for what he knew might be his final protective action. The next few moments would determine whether he succeeded in his sworn duty to protect Princess Anne, or whether this evening would end in tragedy for the entire royal family. The moment Princess Anne stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, the entire nature of the confrontation changed. Inspector Beaton, blood seeping through his jacket from the shoulder wound, knew that his primary objective had become infinitely more challenging. With the princess now exposed and vulnerable, every second became critical in determining the outcome of this crisis. The lead gunman, emboldened by Princess Anne's presence outside the vehicle, moved closer with renewed confidence. His weapon remained trained on Inspector Beaton, but his attention was clearly focused on capturing the royal target, who had just made his job significantly easier. "Your Royal Highness has made a wise decision," the gunman said, his voice carrying a disturbing mixture of satisfaction and menace. "Now you will come with us quietly, and no one else needs to be hurt." Princess Anne's response revealed the steel that lay beneath her aristocratic exterior. Despite the trembling that had initially betrayed her fear, her voice was steady and resolute. "I will do nothing of the sort. If you wish to take me, you will have to do so by force, and I assure you that such action will have consequences beyond your imagination." Ronald Russell, the civilian who had intervened in the situation, was now grappling with the second gunman near the rear of the Rolls-Royce. His courage had prevented the criminals from maintaining complete control of the scene, but his lack of training made his actions unpredictable and potentially dangerous to everyone involved. Inspector Beaton, assessing the rapidly evolving situation, realized that conventional protection protocols were inadequate for their circumstances. With Princess Anne exposed, multiple armed adversaries, and civilian involvement, he needed to adapt his strategy to the chaos that surrounded them. Alex Callender, the chauffeur, had remained in the driver's seat throughout the confrontation, his hands trembling on the steering wheel as he watched the violence unfold around his vehicle. His 15 years of service to the royal family had never prepared him for anything approaching this level of danger and responsibility. Miss Brassey, now alone in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, faced a terrible dilemma. Her instinct was to remain with Princess Anne and offer whatever support she could, but Inspector Beaton's training had taught him that reducing the number of potential hostages was always preferable in such situations. The lead gunman, growing impatient with Princess Anne's defiance, made a tactical error that Inspector Beaton immediately recognized as an opportunity. In his eagerness to seize the princess, he moved close enough that his weapon was no longer at optimal distance for accurate shooting, particularly given the chaotic nature of the scene. Inspector Beaton, despite his wound, retained enough strength and training to attempt a disarming maneuver. His years of close protection work had included extensive hand-to-hand combat training specifically designed for situations where firearms were involved in confined spaces. The inspector's move was swift and unexpected. Using his uninjured arm, he struck the gunman's wrist, while simultaneously stepping close enough to prevent the weapon from being aimed effectively. The two men became locked in a desperate struggle for control of the pistol, their movements bringing them dangerously close to Princess Anne. During this physical confrontation, the gunman's weapon discharged accidentally, the bullet striking the pavement near Alex Callender's feet. The chauffeur, startled by the near miss, instinctively ducked below the dashboard, leaving Miss Brassey as the only person with a clear view of the entire scene. Princess Anne, witnessing Inspector Beaton's desperate struggle with the armed criminal, made another decision that would later be remembered as an example of royal courage. Rather than seeking safety, she moved to assist her wounded protection officer, grabbing the gunman's arm and attempting to prevent him from regaining control of his weapon. The involvement of Princess Anne in the physical struggle created a moment of confusion that Ronald Russell used to his advantage. Breaking free from his confrontation with the second gunman, he charged toward the group surrounding Princess Anne. his intervention adding another element of chaos to the desperate struggle. The second gunman, realizing that their operation was spiraling completely out of control, began to retreat toward the Ford Escort. His primary concern had shifted from capturing Princess Anne to escaping the scene before police arrived, and his abandonment of his partner demonstrated the criminal organization's lack of cohesion under pressure. Inspector Beaton, locked in combat with the lead gunman while trying to protect Princess Anne, felt his strength beginning to ebb from blood loss. His shoulder wound was more serious than he had initially realized, and the physical exertion of the struggle was taking its toll on his ability to maintain the fight. Princess Anne, recognizing Inspector Beaton's deteriorating condition, showed remarkable presence of mind under extreme duress. She began calling for help at the top of her voice, her royal training having taught her that attracting attention was often the best defense against criminal activity in public spaces. Her calls for assistance were heard by several other pedestrians who had been watching the confrontation from a safe distance. While most remained hesitant to intervene directly, several began shouting for police and creating the kind of public attention that criminals typically sought to avoid. The lead gunman, finding himself outnumbered and facing increasing public exposure, began to realize that his mission was doomed to failure. His struggle with Inspector Beaton had prevented him from maintaining control of the situation, and Princess Anne's resistance had made her capture far more difficult than anticipated. Ronald Russell's continued interference in the operation reached its climax when he managed to strike the second gunman with sufficient force to send the man sprawling across the pavement. This action effectively eliminated one of the two primary threats, though the lead gunman still posed a significant danger to everyone present. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance indicated that police response was imminent. Someone among the growing crowd of witnesses had successfully contacted authorities, and the criminal's window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Inspector Beaton, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed, managed to twist the gunman's weapon away from Princess Anne's direction. The physical struggle had brought all three participants to the ground near the Rolls-Royce, creating a confused mass of bodies that made it difficult for any observers to understand exactly what was happening. Princess Anne, despite being involved in the physical struggle, maintained her composure and continued to assist Inspector Beaton however she could. Her involvement in the fight demonstrated a level of personal courage that would later become legendary within the royal family and among protection professionals. The lead gunman, realizing that police arrival was imminent and his partner had abandoned the scene, made a final desperate attempt to complete his mission. Breaking free from the struggle temporarily, he raised his weapon toward Princess Anne with clear intent to either capture or harm her. This moment represented the ultimate test of Inspector Beaton's career and dedication. Despite his injuries, exhaustion, and the chaos surrounding them, he knew that the next few seconds would determine whether he succeeded in his sworn duty to protect the princess or failed in the most public and tragic way possible. The inspector's response to this final threat would require every ounce of training, courage, and determination he possessed. Princess Anne's life hung in the balance, and Inspector Beaton prepared to make whatever sacrifice was necessary to ensure her safety. Inspector Beaton's final protective action came from a place deeper than training or duty. It emerged from the profound loyalty that defined his character and his unwavering commitment to the crown. As the gunman raised his weapon toward Princess Anne, the inspector summoned strength from reserves he didn't know existed and launched himself between the barrel and the princess with complete disregard for his own safety. The sound of the gunshot echoed through Pall Mall like thunder, causing pedestrians throughout the area to freeze in shock and terror. The bullet intended for Princess Anne struck Inspector Beaton in the chest, the impact sending him backward into the princess and causing both of them to fall to the pavement beside the Rolls-Royce. Princess Anne, feeling Inspector Beaton's weight collapse against her, immediately understood what had happened. Despite her own shock and fear, her first concern was for the man who had just taken a bullet meant for her. Rolling him gently onto his back, she could see blood spreading across his white dress shirt, and his breathing had become labored and irregular. "James, stay with me," she commanded with the authority that came from generations of royal bloodline. "You will not leave me alone to deal with this situation. That is an order from your princess." The lead gunman, having shot Inspector Beaton, found himself facing a completely different scenario than he had planned. Princess Anne was no longer trembling with fear. Instead, she knelt beside her wounded protection officer with fierce determination etched across her face. Her transformation from frightened victim to defiant protector was both unexpected and unsettling to the criminal. Ronald Russell, witnessing Inspector Beaton being shot, experienced a surge of rage that overcame any remaining caution. Without regard for his own safety, he charged the gunman with the fury of someone who had just watched an act of unconscionable cowardice. His assault on the criminal was swift and decisive, years of boxing training evident in every movement. The gunman, caught off guard by Russell's attack, attempted to turn his weapon toward this new threat. However, his positioning near the fallen Inspector Beaton and Princess Anne made it difficult to maneuver effectively, and Russell's boxing skills proved superior to the criminal's combat training. Princess Anne, while maintaining pressure on Inspector Beaton's chest wound with her evening gloves, watched Russell's assault on the gunman with a mixture of gratitude and concern. The situation remained extremely dangerous, but the arrival of this brave civilian had shifted the balance of power in their favor. The sound of police sirens was now clearly audible and approaching rapidly. The gunman, realizing that his mission had failed completely and his escape window was closing, made a desperate decision to abandon the operation entirely. Breaking free from Russell's attack, he began running toward the Ford Escort, where his partner was already attempting to start the engine. Russell pursued the fleeing gunman for several yards before returning to assist Princess Anne with Inspector Beaton's care. His intervention had been brief but decisive, and his courage would later be recognized with one of Britain's highest civilian honors for bravery. Alex Callender, emerging from behind the dashboard where he had taken cover, immediately contacted emergency services to request medical assistance. His hands shook as he operated the radio, but his voice remained steady as he reported the shooting of a Royal Protection officer and requested immediate ambulance response. Miss Brassey finally emerged from the Rolls-Royce and moved to Princess Anne's side, her lady-in-waiting training taking over as she assessed how best to assist in the medical emergency. Together, the two women worked to keep Inspector Beaton conscious and stable while waiting for professional medical help. Princess Anne's behavior during these critical moments demonstrated the leadership qualities that would later define her public service career. Despite the trauma she had just experienced, she remained focused on Inspector Beaton's care and coordinated the efforts of everyone present to ensure his survival. The inspector, drifting in and out of consciousness, was aware of Princess Anne's voice speaking to him continuously. Her words were a mixture of encouragement, medical assessment, and royal commands that he remain alert and responsive. Even in his wounded state, he found comfort in knowing that his sacrifice had achieved its intended purpose. The Ford Escort, with both criminals now aboard, attempted to flee the scene as police vehicles began arriving from multiple directions. However, the delay caused by Russell's intervention and the gunman's struggle with Inspector Beaton had given law enforcement sufficient time to establish roadblocks and coordinate a comprehensive response. The first police car to arrive contained two constables who immediately secured the scene and began providing additional medical assistance to Inspector Beaton. Their training in emergency response proved invaluable as they worked alongside Princess Anne to stabilize the wounded protection officer. Princess Anne's transformation during the crisis had been remarkable to witness. The young woman who had entered the evening as a somewhat sheltered member of the royal family had emerged as a leader capable of making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. Her courage and composure would later be cited as exemplary by law enforcement and protection professionals. The ambulance arrived within minutes of the police, and paramedics immediately took over Inspector Beaton's care. Their assessment confirmed that while his wounds were serious, his chances of survival were good thanks to the immediate first aid he had received from Princess Anne and the others. As Inspector Beaton was loaded into the ambulance, Princess Anne insisted on accompanying him to the hospital. Despite the paramedics' concerns about protocol and the potential security risks involved, her determination to remain with her wounded protector was unwavering. Ronald Russell, exhausted from his intervention but uninjured, found himself being interviewed by detectives who had arrived to begin the criminal investigation. His account of the events would prove crucial in understanding how the situation had developed and ultimately been resolved. The scene on Pall Mall had attracted a large crowd of onlookers and media representatives, all eager to understand what had happened to Princess Anne and her party. Police worked to establish a secure perimeter while allowing emergency vehicles access to the area. Ms. Brassey and Alex Callender provided detailed statements to investigators about the events leading up to the shooting. Their perspectives, as witnesses who had observed the entire incident from different vantage points, helped police piece together a comprehensive timeline of the criminal operation. The Ford Escort had been stopped approximately 2 miles from the scene, and both criminals were taken into custody without further violence. Their capture would lead to revelations about the planning and motivation behind the attack on Princess Anne, information that would have significant implications for royal security protocols. As news of the incident began to spread throughout London and beyond, Buckingham Palace faced the challenge of managing public response while supporting Princess Anne and Inspector Beaton. The shooting of a royal protection officer in the course of his duties was unprecedented in modern British history. Inspector Beaton's condition remained serious but stable as he was transported to St. Mary's Hospital, where the royal family's medical team was being assembled to oversee his care. Princess Anne's insistence on accompanying him had created additional security complications, but her determination could not be swayed. The investigation into the incident would eventually reveal that the attack had been planned for weeks and specifically targeted Princess Anne, for reasons that would shock the public and royal family alike. The criminals' motivations and the broader implications of their plot would only become clear through extensive interrogation and investigation. The journey to St. Mary's Hospital became a surreal experience for Princess Anne as she sat beside Inspector Beaton in the ambulance, watching paramedics work to stabilize the man who had taken a bullet meant for her. The weight of his sacrifice pressed heavily on her consciousness, and she found herself making silent promises about how she would honor his courage in the years to come. Inspector Beaton, despite his injuries, remained partially conscious during the transport. His training had taught him to maintain awareness even in crisis situations, and he was acutely aware of Princess Anne's presence beside him. Through his pain and medication-induced haze, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that he had succeeded in his primary mission. "James, I need you to know something," Princess Anne said quietly as the ambulance navigated through London traffic. "What you did tonight, that level of courage and dedication, will never be forgotten. Not by me, not by my family, and not by the Crown." The inspector's response was barely audible, but his words carried the same dignity that had defined his service. "It was my honor, Your Royal Highness. I would make the same choice again without hesitation." At the hospital, word of their arrival had spread quickly, and a team of the finest surgeons in London had been assembled to treat Inspector Beaton's wounds. The royal physician, Sir Richard Bayliss, had been contacted and was en route to oversee the medical care of both the protection officer and Princess Anne, who would need evaluation for shock and potential injuries from the struggle. The hospital's administration faced the unprecedented challenge of accommodating a royal patient while maintaining the security necessary to protect Princess Anne. Special arrangements had to be made for her presence in the medical facility, including coordination with additional protection officers who had been dispatched from Buckingham Palace. As Inspector Beaton was wheeled into surgery, Princess Anne insisted on remaining in the hospital, despite the security complications her presence created. Her determination to stay close to her wounded protector reflected a loyalty that would characterize her relationships with staff and protection officers throughout her life. The investigation into the attack was progressing rapidly, under the leadership of Detective Chief Inspector Peter Nicholson of Scotland Yard's Special Branch. The capture of both criminals had provided immediate opportunities for interrogation, and the intelligence gathered was revealing the sophisticated nature of the plot against Princess Anne. The lead gunman, identified as Ian Ball, was a 26-year-old with a history of mental health issues and an obsession with the royal family. His plan had been to kidnap Princess Anne and hold her for ransom, demanding millions of pounds and the release of political prisoners from British jails. The complexity of his scheme suggested months of planning and surveillance of royal family movements. Ball's interrogation revealed disturbing details about his preparation for the attack. He had studied Princess Anne's public schedule for weeks, identifying her charity event at the Guildhall as an optimal opportunity for kidnapping. His knowledge of royal protection protocols suggested either inside assistance or extensive independent research. The second criminal, a petty criminal recruited by Ball to assist with the operation, provided additional information about the planning process. His testimony revealed that Ball had originally intended to target other members of the royal family, but had settled on Princess Anne because he believed her security detail would be less extensive than that of more senior royals. Ronald Russell's heroic intervention was being celebrated throughout London as news of the incident spread. His decision to involve himself in the dangerous situation, despite having no training or obligation to do so, exemplified the civilian courage that had helped prevent a national tragedy. The media response to the incident was intense and immediate. Newspapers across Britain and around the world covered the story extensively, praising both Inspector Beaton's sacrifice and Princess Anne's courage during the crisis. The shooting of a royal protection officer was unprecedented in modern British history and captured public attention like few events ever had. Buckingham Palace issued carefully crafted statements designed to inform the public while maintaining appropriate security considerations. Queen Elizabeth II herself was kept continuously updated on Inspector Beaton's condition and Princess Anne's well-being, and she issued personal instructions that no expense be spared in providing the finest medical care available. The surgery to treat Inspector Beaton's wounds lasted several hours, during which Princess Anne maintained her vigil in the hospital's royal suite. Her refusal to leave despite official suggestions that she return to the palace demonstrated the depth of her commitment to the man who had saved her life. During the long night at the hospital, Princess Anne had time to reflect on the events that had changed her life forever. The experience had revealed aspects of her own character that she had never been forced to confront, and she emerged from the crisis with a new understanding of both courage and leadership. The successful surgery to repair Inspector Beaton's injuries was announced shortly before dawn, bringing relief to Princess Anne and the entire royal family. The surgeon's report indicated that while recovery would be lengthy, the inspector's wounds were not life-threatening, and he was expected to make a complete recovery. Inspector Beaton's first words upon awakening from surgery were a request to see Princess Anne. Despite medical advice suggesting he rest, his concern for her well-being remained his primary focus even in his wounded state. Their reunion in the hospital recovery room was emotional and profound, marking the beginning of a lifelong bond forged through shared trauma. Princess Anne's response to Inspector Beaton's recovery was characteristic of her direct, honest communication style. "James, you saved my life last night. But more than that, you taught me something about the true meaning of duty and courage. I will never be the same person I was before this experience." The broader implications of the attack on Princess Anne led to comprehensive reviews of royal protection protocols. Inspector Beaton's heroic actions had prevented a tragedy, but the incident revealed vulnerabilities in the system that needed immediate attention to prevent future threats to the royal family. The trial of Ian Ball and his accomplice became a major public event, with testimony from Princess Anne, Inspector Beaton, and Ronald Russell providing detailed accounts of the attack. The proceedings revealed the full scope of Ball's deranged plan and the level of danger that had been present during those terrifying moments on Pall Mall. Inspector Beaton's recovery became a matter of national interest, with regular updates provided about his progress. His courage had captured the public imagination, and he received thousands of letters and cards from citizens expressing their gratitude for his sacrifice in protecting Princess Anne. Princess Anne's own recovery from the psychological trauma of the incident was aided by her decision to become personally involved in Inspector Beaton's rehabilitation. Her frequent visits to his bedside and active participation in his recovery process helped both of them process the events they had shared. The honors and recognition that followed the incident reflected the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. Inspector Beaton received the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian award for gallantry, while Ronald Russell was honored for his civilian courage. Princess Anne insisted on personally presenting these awards, emphasizing the debt of gratitude she felt toward both men. The long-term impact of the incident on Princess Anne's character and public service career was profound and lasting. The experience had tested her under the most extreme circumstances possible, and she had emerged with a deeper understanding of courage, loyalty, and the true meaning of royal duty. Inspector Beaton's return to active duty months later was celebrated throughout the Protection Services community. His actions on Pall Mall had set a new standard for personal courage and dedication that would inspire protection officers for generations to come. The friendship that developed between Princess Anne and Inspector Beaton in the aftermath of the incident became legendary within royal circles. Their shared experience had created a bond that transcended the normal professional relationship between a royal family member and a protection officer. Years later, when Princess Anne reflected on the incident that had changed her life, she often spoke of how it had taught her that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear when duty and loyalty demanded it. The trembling that Inspector Beaton had noticed that evening had been the beginning of her transformation into one of the most respected and courageous members of the royal family.